Hello there, BookTube. My name is Daniel. Welcome back to my channel, Guilty Feet. When your heart's on fire, you must realize smoke gets in your I've got no rhythm. And today I'm going to do another one of my accidental authors. An accidental author is an author that I have somehow read at least 3 books by. In this instance, I have read 6 books by this author, and I would never list him as one of my favorite authors, but that's the way it is. This is a gentleman now in his mid-70s, so of that generation with Amos and Rushdie, Ian McEwan, Ishiguro, but never quite achieved the levels of success or critical success, maybe even literary success, readership, I'm not sure. I'm talking about Paul Auster that I'm going to be talking about, American, Jewish, East Coast. At one time was married to Lydia Davis, and I read her collected stories earlier this year. He's currently married to Siri Hustved, another novelist who I haven't read. As I say, I've got 6 books by Paul Auster here, and again, at least 2 occasions where I said, yeah, I think I'm done with Paul Auster, and then went back and read more. I think I probably first encountered Paul Auster before I read Paul Auster. There was a movie came out in the mid-90s called Smoke, directed by Wayne Wang. It was a sort of classic mid-90s indie ensemble piece that Auster wrote. And I was thinking, this was after he came to Israel. I was 26 years old, married with an infant child, and my cousins here in Israel would occasionally take the baby or have one of their kids babysit and take my wife and I out to the movies, and they took us to see Smoke. I'm not sure it was widely seen. I don't know if many people know the movie today, but I loved it. Starring Harvey Keitel as Augie and William Hurt's in there, and a few other bits and pieces. And the movie stayed with me, particularly. It's a movie about one of those great talky movies, and it's a movie about storytelling. And at one point, I think Harvey Keitel's character Augie tells a story, and it's a kind of Shaggy Dog tale where nothing much happens, and you don't know whether to believe it or not believe it. And then the movie continues, and at the end of the movie, over the closing credits, you see the story he told being played out. So the story that you weren't sure while he was telling was real, you see him in it. Just a sort of 2-minute version of this story, and the music in the playing over the credits is Tom Waits' "Innocent When You Dream." Or at least a version of Innocent When You Dream. I don't think it was the original version. I think there's another version on that album, and the song stayed with me, and I have it on every playlist I've had since then. And I love that movie, Smoke. So I think at that point I went back and decided that I really should read Paul Auster. And at that point, the most important Paul Auster thing to read was his New York Trilogy. This originally published, I think, as 3 separate novels, and then almost immediately, well, as soon as all 3 were out, published together in the UK by Faber and Faber, which is was a sign of quality for me. And so I went to pick this up. This is secondhand. I paid £4 for that in my secondhand bookshop in Edgware in England, which no longer exists. This is April '98. So I was living in Israel. I must have been back visiting the UK and went and bought this. And struggled with it, didn't get it at all. It went over my head, and it's weird, and it's not a detective story. It's existential and odd, and I just slogged my way through this and decided at that point Paul Auster was not an author that I was ever going to be interested in, and put it to one side and said, some people rave about this because it's not a sort of traditional narrative, and doesn't work the way other fictions work, and just a bit painful for me, and didn't enjoy it. So that was me, done with Paul Auster the first time. And then somebody who came to visit us was on holiday, stayed over with us, and when they left their copy of this book behind, the next Paul Auster that I read, Leviathan. And this is an American edition, the cover's falling off, American Penguin edition. So everything else I've got is published in the UK by Faber. This is, you can barely see, there's a penguin, there's the penguin. So they must have been in America and picked this up and left this in our apartment. And so despite having sworn off Paul Auster, I thought, well, you know what, I'll give it another go. And in contrast to the New York Trilogy, which I found opaque and complex and hard to penetrate, this was a very readable story that was interesting and seemed familiar to me as a consumer of modern literary fiction. There's bits of I would say John Updike in here, and just it read very smoothly, and I like this very much. So that was Leviathan. That was the second Paul Auster book. So now I'm kind of thinking, okay, if I have opportunities to read more Paul Auster, I may. And I think I've spoken before about this book club, this online book club that I was a member of in the early 2000s. It was called BOL Books Online, and they had every month they had a new list of books which they were selling at 60% off cover price. So these were the first, and often the books they'd be selling 60% off the new release hardback cover price, but often they would be sort of airport paperback editions. So they were 6% off the hardback cover price, but they often weren't hardbacks, but occasionally they were. And so this was one of those books that I bought. This is Paul Auster's The Book of Illusions, which I have in hardback. I bought this in January 03. So, and you know, the cover price on this was £16.99. £17. What's 60% of that? That's a cheap, under £10 for a brand new hardback in a time in my life where I could not afford to buy hardback books, but happy to take one in. And new Paul Auster, this was new at the time, and I come off the positive experience of Leviathan, and Book of Illusions, loved this. And this, as you can just about make out from the cover, this was a story about silent film and the power of film and lost films, and enjoyed this very much. Just a very good novel. And then a couple of years after that, another his next novel was available and was available in Books Online. I got this also, but this is one of those airport editions. But I would have got it 60% off the hardback cover price. And this is the Brooklyn Follies, which I also really enjoyed. Very readable. It put me in a good place with Paul Auster after that early bad experience, which can happen. And I guess there's many people still talk about the New York Trilogy as the peak and the best that Auster has to offer, and really it didn't work for me. But these novels, I was really thoroughly enjoying them, and decided maybe even go back and read some of his back catalogue. There is a book called The Music of Chance, which I haven't read, which was made into a film with Mandy Patinkin, I think. But this, I think, was his second novel after the New York Trilogy, or the first novel released after the New York Trilogy. And there's Moon Palace, and I went back and picked up a copy. And this is, again, this is all Faber and Faber. These two were also published by Faber and Faber. Always a sign of quality. And this was the kind of edition that was around in my early reading years. So published by Faber and Faber, but they always had the name of the author and the title of the book and the Faber and Faber logo in a box on the cover. This was for many years the way Faber and Faber books were presented, regardless of who the author was. One second, I'll get you another example of this. These are some early Ishigurus, also published by Faber and Faber, and you can see, that's the way. There was a cover image, and then the name, the author's name, and the book title name in a square quadrilateral on the cover. This was very standard, and I feel warmly towards it because these are the editions that I grew up with. So I read Moon Palace and liked that, but was kind of done with Paul Auster at that point. So then I'd read 5 novels. And didn't really feel a burning need. Well, I liked Brooklyn Follies and I liked the Book of Illusions. There was a similarity of tone there, which said, okay, I get it. This has been a better experience than the first time around and done. And then someone bought me for my birthday another Paul Auster, which had been well reviewed, but there was something about it which decreased the likeliness of me picking it up. And that was because it was bloody enormous. And this is 4321, which was published, I don't know when, only a few years ago now, 4 or 5 years ago, maybe 2017. And it's like 1,000 pages. And I just said, well, you know what, I don't have such a fabulous experience with Paul Auster, over the whole of the career that I needed to read a 1,000-page book by Paul Auster. But someone bought it for me for my birthday, and this isn't even this is a smaller paperback size. This is like smaller than a regular, because this is I think probably a size made for international distribution. So this was probably bought in a bookshop here in Israel, so it's imported, but they import these weird size international editions. So given it's such a big book and the print's smaller because the book itself is smaller, this was not my first choice. But once someone bought it for me on my birthday, and I did have good reviews, and I read it and I really enjoyed it. Loved 4321. Some people struggle with it. 4321 is because the same story is told over 4 different not timelines, 4 different versions of the same story are told, like a sliding doors kind of thing, where something different happens. There's and the stories diverge, but each time we move on a chapter, we go back to that version. So 1, 1, 1, 1 are all the same story, and then 2, 2, 2, 2 starts off the same as 1 but diverges, and then we follow on that timeline, and 3 we follow on that timeline, and 4. And for example, in one of them, the protagonist dies, and so each time we get to that one, it's just a blank page. So it'll be 1, get a whole chapter 1, 2, whole chapter 2, and then 3 is just a blank page because he died in the previous number 3, and we carry on with 4. I like this. It worked for me. It was 1,000 pages. But it was readable, it was entertaining, it was worked for me as a novel. But now I think I really am done with Paul Auster. So I can't really explain how I've acquired and read 6 books by Paul Auster. I guess I have to turn over to you guys. Have you read any Paul Auster? He doesn't seem to be read very widely or talked about. I think 4321 maybe some people spoke about it on BookTube, like at the early days of BookTube, but mostly I don't hear people talk about Paul Auster. Even the New York Trilogy, which is a kind of sort of cult literary work. Have you read any Paul Auster? Have you read more than 3 books by Paul Auster? Would you recommend Paul Auster? Where does he fit in the 21st century literary canon, if anywhere? I've read 6 books by Paul Auster, so he is another of my accidental authors. I hope you're keeping well. God bless. Bye.